first and foremost, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining me, man. We've been chatting for a while, but man, I'm super pumped.
Yeah, Martin, I'm glad we're finally making this happen. We've been back and forth a couple times. We had some things scheduled and this and that. But dude, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. And thank you so much for that intro, man. And you made me sound better than I really am.
No, man, you're great. And especially about the most interested. I listened to your most recent episode. Well, I don't know, you published a lot now, but with Brian Boger, and you talked about how you wouldn't be the most interested person. First things first, happy belated birthday and happy belated Father's Day. Yeah.
Thank you so much, man. I don't have my own kids, but they are like my own kids, right? I have two great stepchildren. Great some days, frustrating some days, most days. But I'm learning the ropes as I go, man. I'm still new to the game.
Now you've talked about them in some podcasts, and I really respect that and appreciate that. And my stepdad and I were he passed away unfortunately years ago, but very, very close. So that's awesome. Speaking of family, because initially we were going to record back in April, and that was I wanted to ask you back then because in May I took my family to Disney, and our first time, and I have a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old, and my wife had never been as well. But I was going to ask you, because you've talked about Disney in your podcast, what's your advice for fathers taking their family to Disney?
Yeah, it's first of all, Disney's interesting, right? It's like this. It's this pair. I can't even think of the word, but it's this whole thing where like half the world's like, oh my gosh, I love Disney, and the other half of the world's like, I don't know, they're this woke organization, whatever. Yeah. So to me, Disney World is a place where you can just go and let it all go, right? You're in this Disney bubble. You get to enjoy the whole entire process. You get to have fun. You get to almost relive a childhood. Even if you didn't go there as a child, it's almost like this childlike tendency. And so for me, if you're going to go with your kids for the first time, for the 5th time, for the 10th time, it's really enjoy the little moments, right? Like let the kids be kid with them. Enjoy the little moments because their eyes are going to be open to a whole new world they've never seen before. Yeah. The magic is constantly happening around you, and just see them take it in. Right. Obviously, the first time we took the kids, they were right around the same age as your kids now. Right. So we took them 2 years ago for the first time, and so they were 11 and 9 at the time. And to see even the 11-year-old who was just getting to the age of like, I'm too cool for school. Like he was just blown away by just the little nuances, right? Like, so figure out what your kid likes and turn their interest to that, right? Obviously the 9-year-old girl was more into the fantasy side of things, where the 11-year-old boy who's a creative loved the fact that every time he transitioned into a new country in Epcot, there's a different sound and a different smell. And how do they do that? Like, that's amazing. Like, so really lean into that and just enjoy the process with the kids.
And all the inside jokes. There were so many little moments, and I'm actually glad that we talked after because I'd messaged you privately before I left. Said, "Hey man, what's your advice?" And you gave me some really good advice. And you actually talked about enjoyed the little moments. So many great things. We did 6 days, but one of my favorite parts, we have an inside joke now as a family. On day 3, my daughter, she's eating an ice cream, and she was like, being very serious, like, "This all expense paid trip has been great for me." And I'm like, who the hell do you think has been paying for this? Like, who do you think? Like, I was just like, I made this shock. Enjoy your $9 ice cream, please. Like,
yeah, Disney's not cheap, man. And where did you guys stay?
The All-Star Sports Resort.
Okay,
so
cool.
Does
that have the Skyliner on it or no?
I don't think so. No. Okay. So they have. I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, like it's the original Disney resorts, and it's a set of 3. It's All-Star Sports, All-Star Music, and All-Star Movies. But it's all less than 15 minutes from there. And I am military, and a lot of people stay at the Shades of Green, which is, I guess, like the military hotel. But we wanted to stay somewhere else, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I always say if you can stay on property, stay on property. Yeah. And they have the variety of price ranges. We stay at Polynesian, not because of me. It's because my wife is a bougie traveler, and so she has to, that's where she went as a kid. When I was a kid, we went to the Holiday Inn down the road. That had the free shuttle to the parks every single day.
That's exactly
where we stay.
Yeah, yep. We had the free shuttle. In your episode, and I'm not sure how many times, and I've just recently started like listening to you within the past 6 months or so, but. In a past episode of Matt Cardona, you mentioned that you draw inspiration from Disney. How do you draw inspiration from Disney?
Yeah. So again, I was talking about how they create magic, right? And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of it's all about experiences in Disney, right? They don't call them roller coasters; they call them attractions, right? They don't call them rides; they're attractions
Yeah.
because they transport you into a new world. And so I take a lot of what they do and go, how can I take this experience and put it into an event that I'm creating to have people walk away going, wow, I feel amazing, right? Like
Yeah.
the end of the day, like what's the difference between Disney and Six Flags, right? It's the theming. It's the how you feel when you're there and when you leave. And so I'm constantly thinking, okay, how can I take something? Obviously, I'm not going to have Mickey Mouse. I'm not going to have fireworks. I'm not going to do any of that stuff. But
Yeah.
it's the idea of like, okay, they're doing these little tiny things that make the difference in how I feel and how everybody in this park feels. So how can I do that with my events, with any experience that I do? How can I make people feel a certain way? And that's the different things that I may draw from time to time, right? Like I believe smells are super important. I would have never thought about that until I realized in Disney, like they purposely pump in different smells in different places, right? Main Street USA smells like buttered popcorn because they pump in, not because they're making popcorn, which they are, but like because they pump in that smell. And I go, well, your sense of smell is tied to memories. It's tied to all these things. It's one of the most powerful senses we have. So how can you manipulate the smell of the room that your event is in? And what do you want it to smell like and feel like? And I literally do those things, right? Like I have a mastermind called the Skeleton Key Mastermind.
Yeah.
And I give them a candle when they come on. It's a custom scent to people in the mastermind. And it smells like, this is going to sound weird. It smells better than what it's going to sound like, but it smells like the wood section of like a Home Depot. And the reason is because we are building our businesses. We are building the impact we want to make, right? So the idea behind that is like, this is why the smell is, we need wood to build, right? So
Yeah.
those little things I do on purpose. And I would not even be thinking that way if it weren't for being able to go into Disney and experience those things.
I do have some more like I do have some podcast related questions or topics I want to discuss, but um, through just researching you though, I did want to ask, you talked about just making those small connections and the memories at Disney. When I say Ricky the waiter from the restaurant Boathouse, what comes to mind?
No, he's a good dude, man. It's funny. So I have a friend who's like, I like Disney, but I always say like, I'm a fan of Disney World, but I'm not a Disney adult, right? There's a difference. Like I'm
Yeah.
not wearing the ears. I'm not doing the matching shirts with my family, but I have a friend, John Beebe, who is a Disney adult.
Yeah.
And so he gets into these places and he's a great connector of people, and he ends up meeting Ricky, right? So Ricky's one of the servers at the Boathouse, and he's got a great personality. He's been there forever. And my first experience with Ricky was my mastermind had a meetup in Orlando, and we all went to dinner at the Boathouse. And Ricky was able to set it up where everybody had their own check, because I wasn't picking up that check. Everybody had their own check. The delivery was top notch. And it's really funny you bring this up, because obviously interviewing Matt Cardone, before you interview somebody, you do a deep dive, and I'm deep in his Instagram, and I realized that he shouts out Ricky on a post outside of Boathouse because he's also a Disney adult. He's more of a Disney adult than I am. Matt is, but like he's somebody who just over delivers, right? But this is that again is the Disney magic that you're talking about, of like, how can you over deliver? Now, not everybody's perfect, but he's been doing it for so long that he's pretty spot on with how he serves individuals and makes sure they're taken care of.
No, was he really a guest at Thanksgiving?
No, he wasn't a guest. He was our server.
Okay.
Yeah. So me and John, our families were in Disney at the same time, and so we had our Thanksgiving dinner at the Boathouse, and he was the guy who set everything up. Yeah.
No, that's all. I love that. And you talked about diving the research. I've done I feel like quite a big bunch of research on you. But I opened up with a quote: "An attitude of gratitude is the heartbeat of happiness." And I pulled that quote from your Instagram, and you commented when it was posted that it hits so hard. What about that quote hits hard with you?
Yeah, man, I'll be honest. Like, gratitude is the thing that changes everything, right? Like when I think about my journey through my life of, I always say that I was least likely to succeed in high school. It would have been me. I had a 1.7 GPA. My mom, battled opioids for 20 years, and my dad was in jail. And I realized that I allowed outside circumstances to dictate how I felt every day. right? If things on the outside were bad, I was unhappy. I was all these things. But when you're able to switch into the mindset of gratitude, it changes everything. It literally can put you in a better place, even if your circumstances haven't changed yet. Now, the true test of gratitude for me is, can you actually be grateful in a moments of lack? And this is when most people miss the boat, right? They're like, oh, I'm grateful for everything. Yeah, when everything's great, but are you grateful for everything when everything's bad? And I realized, although, losing my mom to opioids and going through the struggles that I had and all those things, like, I look back now and I'm grateful for every single moment. Now, would I want my mom back? 100%. I would trade everything to have my mom back. But I am grateful. I can't change that, right? So I have to find gratitude in the moments that I've had. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if my mom didn't have her struggles. That's just the truth, right? Without my hardships, I wouldn't be able to speak on stages and have a podcast where I get to interview the coolest people on the planet and do all these things. So you find gratitude even in the worst moments. And when you live in that mindset, opportunity presents itself.
No, love it. And I've heard you talk about that, and it's I appreciate how open you are with everything. When I say I've probably listened to about 40 of your episodes over the past 6 months or so, and it's and I have a notebook, and if you want, I can even send like the notes I have. I have all these random notes about you just from things that, yes. And I just appreciate how open you are. Before we started recording, or actually officially started, we talked about WrestleMania because we're both wrestling fans. And even during the intro, I know, again, you were sharing the great experience you had at WrestleMania. And in the intro, I talked about, because you talk about journey and destinations, but I do have a wrestling related question for me as we were talking. So we met because of Chris Van Vliet, and I was part of his podcast mastermind, full-time creator. And you were one of the guest speakers one night. And I was just blown away. I was like, man, that's when I started following you, actually. My wrestling related question is the WWE Money in the Bank is fast approaching. It's this weekend. Yeah. If you could cash in a Money in the Bank contract on anything in life other than a WWE contract, what would it be?
Bro, that's a really good question for a wrestling fan.
Yeah.
It's a really good question. Don't ask people who aren't wrestling fans, because they're going to be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Dude, you know what? That's such a great question. And it's kind of hard for me to answer because I really, really love my life the way that it is. Now, I'm going to take this as this is going to be a selfish cash in, right?
Perfect.
Because when I selfish, right, you cash it in for the biggest prize in wrestling. So I would say I would cash it in. So me and my wife just recently started investing in real estate, and we have a couple properties now, and we want to grow that so we can replace my wife's income in order for her to be full-time in her passions. So I would cash it in on however many properties we would need to replace her income so she can focus in on her passions more full-time. That's not selfish, but it is selfish.
No, it's great. But that's what it's supposed to be, though. I think it's okay to be selfish, because it's sometimes, I mean, we obviously want to give to people, but we still have to develop ourselves.
I probably should have said like world peace or something. No, I messed that one up.
No, I like it. I like the real estate because that's a real answer. And it's not selfish, because you're talking about, I want to do this to help my wife pursue her passion. And I think that's great, because I imagine like she's been very supportive of you with the podcast, because podcasting is not easy, especially if you really want to do something with it, right? And like, podcasting to you is not a hobby. It's not a hobby to me, but I get comments all the time, like, people just think it's not that hard to start a podcast, or why don't you just do this? I'm like, is that it? Like, yeah, I can do that, but it's going to cost me $50,000, right? But
yeah.
Now, thanks for the feedback on that question. So, yeah, I thought you might appreciate that one. I've already mentioned a couple of times I've started following you with the past 6 months or so, or maybe even longer. Time's flying. I find that you do a great job of injecting your own personal experiences into the conversation that drive further interest from the guests. Like, you're an exceptional interviewer. And I even took down some questions yesterday when I listened to, so when I sent you that video, I was doing deadlifts, and I felt important because you had posted a happy 4th picture or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was in the middle of working out, and I was listening to your episode with Brian Bogert, and that's where I just had to stop. Like, man, and there's questions you asked him. I was like, my God, this is so good. But anyway, it's a fine wine. How did you develop your storytelling ability?
Yeah, man, it's the reps, right? Like like anything else. You want to build muscle, you got to put in the reps over time. I think the greatest downfall to most people's success is the fact that they don't do it long enough, right? They don't get hit enough. They don't go through they don't put in the reps enough, right? So like I look at what I did, right? I started a podcast back when podcasting was not even a thing. Like I would tell people I had a podcast and they would go, "What's a podcast?"
What's a podcast? Yep.
Yeah. And now they just go, "Oh God, everybody has one." Right.
Yeah.
And I started, and what I said to myself right off the bat was, okay, I'm going to do it for a year. I'm going to do 52 episodes and kind of see, where I'm at, and, decide if this is something that I want to keep pursuing. And I'll say this, nobody listened for a long time. Like I was getting 30, 40 downloads. If I had a bigger name on the show, I'd do a couple hundred downloads, so on and so forth. And because I started getting bigger name guests on my show fairly early on. And so around episode 44, 43, I was like, what am I doing? Like nobody cares. I wasn't hearing from anybody. I knew not many people were listening. I was like, what's even the point of this? And somebody reached out to me from Japan on Facebook and said, because of your show, I decided not to take my life. And I decided in that moment that I'm going to keep showing up even if one person listens. And so I always say to somebody, don't start a podcast unless you're okay with doing all the work if only one person is listening. And I really believe that, because that's what's going to get you good, is constantly showing up, working on your craft, being truly curious, right? I talked about this when I was interviewing Bogert. Like curiosity, I think, is what makes me a good podcast host, because I truly care about the conversations that I'm having. And I sit there and I actively listen, and I look at myself, and I think this is something that most podcasters don't do. I look at myself as the director of the conversation, very much like a director of an orchestra or the director of a movie. The end goal. My job is to make sure I direct it in a smooth way to get us to that point. And most people miss the boat on that. They're not actively listening. They're just worried about their next question.
Yeah.
And that's gonna hurt. Now, I can only say this because I was that person. I was worried about the next question I had written down, so that's where I was going to go. And I realized this isn't effective, right? My goal with my podcast is to hopefully build high-level relationships with the people that I get to interview, right? Like I'm friends with Chris Van Vliet because he came on the show, and we just built a relationship over time. Like my goal is that. So I can't do that or be that person to build a relationship if I'm just worried about myself and the next question that I want to ask. And so I think that's one thing. And again, it's just the reps, right? Like, when I first started publicly speaking, I was terrible. Like, you know how people have catchwords when they're speaking, right? Like they'll say a certain word a lot, which by the way, as a podcast host, I say, I love that. I love that all the time, is my catchword when I'm
yeah.
That's my comma. That's my chance to go, okay, now what am I going to say next? And so when I'm speaking like from a stage, like I used to be terrible, and now I don't actually really prep. Like I kind of know where I want it to go, and I allow myself to flow and read off the energy of the room. And because my wife, like I was speaking at an event a couple months ago, and I said to my wife, I guess I should, it was like 2 days before, and I was like, I guess I should really start thinking about what I'm going to say. And she's like, no, you're better when you don't know what you're going to say. Like if you see me speak and I have slides, it's terrible because I'm so worried about hitting my next point, right? So I think it's just the reps, getting comfortable in your own skin, and delivering from that standpoint. But most people quit too early. I think it's like 75% of podcasts don't make it past their first 7 episodes. Like because people think that they're going to, launch the show and millions of people are going to listen. First of all, you're not that interesting. Second of all, there's a lot of competition now, And so just keep showing up and people will find you that need to find you.
No, it's great. I've had mine since January of 2018, but and I haven't given up on it. But this will be episode 57. But it's really within the past 2 years. Or last year, I did 19 episodes, then this is my 14th this year. So I've definitely started, versus just giving up on it. Just like I'm not going to start a new one. I'm just going to pick it back up and just move forward. It's funny you talk about the guests because people, hey, you should have this person, my friend, on the podcast because they're really funny. And I'm like, I'm not looking for that, man. It's funny you talked about I actually had this as a note. You had a note and just over the what did I say? You mentioned that around episode 46 or 47, you wanted to give up on podcasting because you thought no one was listening. And then someone from Japan reaching out. So thanks for sharing that, because that's something I was going to hope you got to. But that's the importance of podcasting. And like you said, even if it's just one person, like you potentially saved a life.
Yeah, and throughout the last 8 whatever years and 500 and I think 528 episodes, and a couple of people have reached out to me. About 4 or 5 people have reached out to me saying similar things. But it's really a humbling thing, right? Like I remember one of my mentors said to me, he's like, Justin, how do you not get like arrogant? How does it feel? Why does it feel like you're not a guy who has a podcast that does as well as it does, and you're friends with the people that you're friends with? And I go, well, first of all, I'm just a dude. Like I'm just a dude from Pennsylvania. If I vibe with somebody, I vibe with them. If I don't, I don't. I don't care about their status, their stature, their income, their anything, right? Like
if they're wrestling.
If you're a wrestling fan, like you can be my friend any day. Like we'll talk about wrestling all the time. Chris Van Vliet posts that meme all the time about like, did we just become best friends? Like when there's 2 wrestling fans.
Yeah,
it's true. But the reality is like, it's the humbling moments of like, wow, because I just share openly, like it's saving lives, it's changing lives. And I just feel really blessed to be in a position where I get to do those types of things. And who am I to be arrogant? Like, what are you talking about, man? And honestly, like I've got friends that are worth $500 million and have millions of followers on social media, and they're the most humble dudes too. Like people just assume that when you have success that all of a sudden you're going to become a dick. I think money and success just really it escalates whatever you are to begin with, And I just again, I'm humbled and blessed that I get to do what I get to do. And I would still do it even if one person was listening. I'm grateful that it's not one person, but at the same time, I would still do it if it was one person.
Yeah, or like you won't make any money from it, right? Because I've been doing this for a long time, and I've a couple months ago I actually calculated all the money I've spent over the past. And I had a sports podcast years before as well, but I got away from that just because it's too much to keep up with sports every single day, right? But but yeah, like it's a lot of money that I've spent, but it's like, man, this is what I think about at nighttime or on the weekends when I'm up just, BSing on my computer, like watching YouTube videos. It's all podcasting or something, or some type of, or interview, or I watch other podcasts, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's a lot of money and it's like, you have to stay committed, but it's, if you're fine with not making any money or just one person listening, then that's cool. Cause I know a lot of people who start podcasts, and especially in the military, like everyone has a leadership podcast in the military now, or some type of development.
Thanks, Jocko.
Yeah, thanks, Jocko. Yeah, man, I had a question because you've talked about your childhood and earlier, and even again through like other episodes. And I found out that Lenny Dykstra was your favorite player, and because it's funny because he was one of my favorite players growing up as well. Remember the Phillies and all that, but. I wanted to, instead of that, I was hoping to take a little detour and some other topics, but and it's kind of a more serious question. But when dredging up past memories is painful and draining, is there like a process or method that you have to cope with it all? And why does podcasting seem to be such a different experience from expressing it in some other way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, like, when I look back at my childhood now, I can be grateful for what I had. My parents had their own demons, but they were amazing parents. They supported me. They loved me. All those things in between. And I couldn't have asked for a better setup to live this life that I get to live. Yeah. Now, with that being said, I can only say that after many coaches, many therapists, many deep conversation, many wounds being healed. There's something that I say pretty often about how, if you become a speaker or a teacher or somebody who's in a position of power, a lot of people try and teach too early. They try and teach about from their pain too early, right? So I always say that an open wound is for you to learn from, and a scar is for others to learn from. And so over time, through therapy, learning different types of modalities to help me through those thought processes, simple things like, hey, if I'm feeling a certain way about my mom and how it affected me, write her a letter and then set it on fire and let it go. Right. Just putting things on paper is a great tool in order to overcome some pain and some trauma and all those things. Now, it doesn't work all the time. It's something that I only had to do once with my mom because I loved her to death, but obviously there was some resentment for certain things. And I let that go, and it began the healing process. Right. And then again, working through with therapists, like I found out, so I had a therapist, his name's Roger. He was amazing. He opened my eyes to like the real reason I had the trauma that I had. I thought, so a lot of my trauma manifested in my relationships. I was not always a good boyfriend. Like I was not physically destructive, but like I was a mess. And so I had a therapist and I was working through that stuff, and he goes, we were working through all the things and blah, blah, blah. And he goes, oh, so you have abandonment issues. And I was like, abandonment issues? No, I was never abandoned. He goes, I understand that your parents didn't leave you on the side of the road when you were a baby, but they chose their demons over being a fully focused parent in their life. And I was like, damn, okay, that's spot on. And so when you find out where your pain truly comes from, that's when you can actually begin to do the work. If you don't find out where it starts, you're never going to be able to figure out how to heal it, right? Like an alcoholic isn't an alcoholic because they're truly addicted to a drug. They're numbing a pain. If you can heal the pain, I truly believe that you can actually heal an alcoholic. Although my dad has been through AA and they have a great program, I don't believe once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. I think that if you handle the trauma that you're running from, you're able to then put down the bottle whenever you'd like, right? And so that's really the difference. So you have to figure out where it began, and then you can do the work to heal it. But it takes time, man. Like it really, really takes time. Oh, and then the second part to your question about podcasting, it's the only long form medium that exists. Like everything else is sound bites. Everything else is highlight reels. Like I always say, like put your if you're feeling depressed, put your phone down and stop watching everybody's highlight reels. Like they're going through shit too. Like even the people who look like their life is perfect online, they're going through shit too. And so podcasting, I believe, gives individuals an opportunity to truly share versus just be a soundbite, right? Like if I was a celebrity and I went on David Letterman, I don't even think he has a show anymore, but I went on David Letterman, right? I'd get 5 minutes. But if I get on a podcast, I've got 60 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, right? Like Joe Rogan does a really good job at getting things out of people, which is why, when he has people like RFK Jr. or Bernie Sanders on, like they show their true colors as politicians versus a debate where they have a minute and a half to speak. He refuses to have Trump on. I would love for him to have Trump on and anybody else just to see who they truly are at the core.
I didn't realize Trump didn't want to go on. One of my favorite episodes. You're right. Like
no, Trump does want to go on. Joe Rogan doesn't want to have him on.
That's what I'm saying. I didn't realize that. I'm sorry that Joe Rogan didn't want to have him on. That's crazy to me because with everyone else he's had on. But of all the episodes he's ever done, my favorites, he did one with CT Fletcher, and I'm also big into like the sport of bodybuilding and all that stuff. But yeah, CT Fletcher, and this is after he talked about his open heart surgery, and it's just such a deep episode. But yeah, to your point, that's why I love podcasting, because podcasting is. I had a friend on my podcast last year, but he talked about podcasting as it's an artifact of time, a slice of that moment, that real time, and you've even talked about that. Like it's almost even nostalgia, that you can go back and just listen to past conversations. But, yeah, just a lot of, like, you were just saying so many things. I was like, and like, that'd be cool to talk about. But, why do you think, we're roughly the same age, but why do you think nostalgia is becoming so real for people our age?
Dude, that's actually a great question, and I think I have an answer. Now, obviously, I'm not an expert on this, but when you
say that Holiday Inn,
yeah, that's right. You think about like you and I, right? I'm I'll be 40 in August. You're 42. Think about all the shit we went through in our lifetime, right? Starting at like 9/11. To the next thing, to COVID and all these things. I believe COVID fueled the nostalgia because people became more depressed. People became more dependent on substances. People became, like suicide rates went through the roof. And I think what nostalgia does is it hits the happy button, bro. It takes us back to the time before all the nonsense, all before social media, before politicians were so blatantly corrupt versus how privately corrupt from before.
Yeah.
Like, and so when I look at that, I believe that's why nostalgia has become such a thing, is because it's an escape from all the crap that's happening in the world, that we've been through, right? Like there's memes about how like we've been through so many different things. 2008, like everybody lost their job, and the stock market crash and all these. It's absolutely wild, the things that we've been through in such a short amount of time, that I believe that's why nostalgia is such a big thing. It's also probably why I love Disney and wrestling. Like I'm just a kid at heart, right? Like that nostalgia button needs to be hit. Although the neon clothes we wore in the 90s, they better never come back.
That's I love the nostalgia part, right? And I saw a meme earlier today and it said, you invited all your friends over to come play football on Xbox. Pizza Hut's on the way. There's 3-liter bottles of Mountain Dew. All your friends are over and the adults don't care how late you stay up. And then the end says you're 43 years old and it's 2024. But I can remember that, just even with our generation too, because we're still linked to the past. Like there's people, even like teenagers today, like there's not really a link to them to World War II. Whereas like when I was growing up and even when I first joined, there were still a lot of, like people, hey, my dad served in World War II or mom served in World War II. So like, and you go back to Pearl Harbor and of course 9/11, even like the OJ trial. I remember in the summer, I think I was 12 or 13, and just all these big events. I'm a huge basketball fan too, so Kobe dying, and man, there's so many things. Hey, I want to go backtrack a little bit. Why is curiosity important to growth and purpose?
Yeah, man. So curiosity, I think curiosity is a tool in order to improve yourself, right? Like I have 4 non-negotiables every single day, and one of them is to learn something new every single day, whether that be a conversation, whether that's something I read, something I listen to on a podcast, something I watch on YouTube. I just want to learn something new every single day. But curiosity is a superpower from a standpoint of, if you can ask the right questions without judgment, right? Like that's kind of curiosity, asking the right questions without judgment. It allows people to come together and learn from one another versus hate on, right? Like I don't even know why we're talking about. I keep talking about politics and divide and all these things that I don't really know why, but like this country is more divided than ever right now. And I really believe that if people were more curious as to why individuals think the way they do, act the way they do, react the way they do, instead of just judging because they're not the same as them, the world would be a better place, right? And then we'll all be smarter because of it. We'll all be wealthier because of it. We'll all have better friendships because of it. Without curiosity, there's nothing but hate and divide. And people just aren't curious enough to figure out why things are the way that they are.
I want to transition some, lighter topics. Can you tell us about a recent friendship from the past 2 to 3 years that's going to be a lasting friendship, and then how that friendship came about?
Yeah, man. I'm trying to think. Actually, Brian Bogert's a really good example of this. Brian, so he was obviously, like you said, he was just back on my show a second time. And it might be more like 3 or 4 years, but you get the gist. It's a newer friendship. But he's somebody who I don't even know how I got connected with. Oh, we actually talked about it on the show. Another guest that I had introduced me to Brian Bogert. And I interviewed him, and I remember thinking as I was interviewing him, this guy is one of the most genuine human beings I've ever met in my life. Like, it was just a thought in the back of my head. And then we ended up staying connected. He actually sent me, he sent me this after he was on the show. It's like, I think it had cookies in it originally, but like, this is my old logo for my podcast. And it's like this wooden box. And that's why we reconnected. So he sends me this, I get in the mail, I reach out to him like, dude, this is so nice. Thank you so much for sending this. You didn't have to do that, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh no, it's just something we do. I appreciate you having me on. And then him and I have just stayed connected from a standpoint of like reaching out to each other, making sure we're good, making sure that the others still got their head up, because what we do we're both in the self-development space, and what we do, it can be heavy at times, right? And it can be lonely at times. And so he's somebody that I think will always be in my world, and a friendship that will last a long time. Again, that was through the podcast. Chris Van Vliet's another guy. I mean, he was probably about 4 years ago too. Just somebody who's genuine, right? Like I've always enjoyed Chris's interview style, and I was never really sure why. But when I got to know him on a personal level, I realized it's because he's just himself. too many interviewers try and be somebody. They try and be a news anchor. They try and be Joe Rogan. They try and be whatever. But he's just himself, and he's a guy who is just truly curious, right? Like, and he's somebody that will just stay connected. We've had a number of times we've gotten to hang out. Obviously, WrestleMania. He came to some random show in Hamburg, Pennsylvania, a wrestling show in Hamburg, Pennsylvania, which is like 20 minutes from me. So we got to hang out for a night there. And he's just somebody that will always be around. And so I feel blessed that the podcast has become an opportunity for me to create these lasting relationships with people that I admire and look up to and want to keep in my life.
Again, and I think even it'd be cool to go back. Imagine if you had Chris on your, if you guys are friends for 30 more years and he's a guest on your podcast 5 times, to think back, be able to go back at those different intervals of time. As we discussed earlier, it's podcasting's that slice of moment, that artifact in time. I want to wrap up because I want to respect your time. One last question. Then I would love to talk about the Growth Now Summit. But this is a question I took from Tim Ferriss, but it's a question I ask at every single podcast because I do love this question. But if there was a giant billboard with your picture on it for the world to see, where would you want that billboard and to be, and what would you want it to say?
Where would I want the billboard? I would probably Times Square, right? That's got a ton of foot traffic, so a lot of people would see it. And the billboard would say, "You are exactly where you're supposed to be and exactly where you chose to be." It's a thought that I love sharing with people because the first time I ever heard that, "You're exactly where you chose to be," I didn't like where I was in my life, and I was pissed about the quote. I was pissed if somebody said that to me. But then the switch flipped. And I was like, wait, that means I can control where I end up. That means I can control what my life is going to be like. And I think people need to hear that more often. Because, again, if you're in a place where you don't like to be, it's exactly where you're supposed to be because you're supposed to learn from those lessons and build a better tomorrow for yourself. And the idea of where you chose to be, it means the choices that you made got you to where you are today. Now, there are people that are going to hear that and go, well, no, my circumstances dictated what happened. I got fired from my job.
Yeah.
My parents were addicts. But this. Well, no, it's how you react to those things. And so I think that's what my billboard would say, man, because I think you got to shine a light on that thought process of you have complete control over your life. Stop with the excuses. One of my favorite quotes, I'll share this really quick, and I know this is more than the answer. One of my favorite quotes is, "Excuses are the nails that built the house of failure." It's a hard one to hear a lot of times, but I always go, excuses.
Hey, if an adult ever says that to you, and you feel offended or something, your clapback should be like, "Well, you peaked in high school or something." Just something random. Hey, I have another recommendation for your billboard, just in case you decide to go something else. It would just be you in Times Square, and it would say, "You can't have love handles and main events WrestleMania."
Dude, I love CM Punk. I love him. He's one of the best on the mics of all time.
Dude,
he's a great wrestler in his time. But he gets hurt all the time. All I was saying was he needs to get fit so he doesn't keep getting hurt. But I'm just saying I'm doubling down on my anger with this man. Like, let's get you in a match, bro.
I have one last bonus question for Growth Now, but just bear with me. I listen to so many different podcasts, but there's this really great podcast where the host asks the same question at the end of every single episode. It's so great. At the end of your life, if you're on your deathbed and everything you've created is gone, all your speaking, all your podcasts, all these different things has disappeared, and it can only be remembered for one sentence, what would you want that sentence to be?
It didn't matter where he came from. What mattered was what he did every single day to create a better tomorrow for himself and the world.
My wife, so when I heard that on your podcast, the one I listened to yesterday, actually with Brian Bogert, I called her out to the garage. This is, of course, like 20 minutes after I sent you that video, and I rewinded it, and I didn't say anything, and I said, "Hey, this is the guy I'm having on my show on tomorrow," and that you asked that question, and she was like, "That is a phenomenal question," and man, I love that question. It's so great.
You know what it does? And I realized this more recently, and I've been asking, I actually used to ask the question all the time, and then I stopped for a long time, and then I brought it back. But here's what I really realized about this question. It shows somebody's true nature. I had a guy on, I won't say who, I had a guy on who was very money focused, which is fine. That doesn't bother me. I think money's important. but he was very money focused, and his answer was around like the financial support of it was like around his finances. I'm like, okay, well that's your whole holy grail, right? Like you idolize money. And then I've heard people say an answer to that, and I go, well, they're not going to think that of you because you're not living that truth, right? And I think the people who answer that question confidently, they are truly living in that truth, right? But I think it shines a light on people like, hey, what do you want that sentence to be? And if you want the sentence to be something and you're not living that life, it gives you an opportunity to reflect and change course and start to change your daily actions in order to have people say that about you when you die.
No, it's probably one of the best podcast questions I've ever heard. And when I say I've been listening to podcasts for 12 years. So, I mean, it's fantastic. Hey, I want to make sure I leave some time for the Growth Now Summit. What do you want people to know about the Growth Now Summit?
Yeah, man. So Growth Now Summit Live is my live event, which honored that you're going to be there, man. I think it's going to be a life-changing event. It's my third in-person event where I get to bring amazing speakers onto the stage and share them with my audience. And I'll say this. So the original idea behind the first Growth Now, it was actually originally called Growth Now Movement Live, and then everybody was messing up the name. So I changed it to Growth Now Summit Live. But the first one ever, the idea behind it was I realized how fortunate I was to have the conversations that I get to have with the people I get to have them with. I also understood that not many people have been able to or are able to build a platform like I have where you get to have those conversations. And I wanted to be able to gift that to individuals to go, here's an opportunity for you to learn from them, be in the room with them, meet them, build a relationship with them, just like I have through my podcast. And so every single time one of my favorite things to do is to build the ultimate speaker lineup that's going to pour into an audience. It's going to help them learn how to grow their business, their relationships, their life, everything in between. And so this year, so far, we have Amberly Lago, Jamie Hess, Ryan Bogert, and I'm missing somebody.
Joseph.
Jonathan George, who's one of the most incredible humans I've had the pleasure.
Ethan Lasher, is it right?
We'll have panels throughout the day too.
Yeah.
Who those individuals? They're actually my mastermind, and so they're going to be on panels. They're amazing human beings who are just killing life, and excited about them too. Brittany Rogars, she went from doing $30,000 a year in her business to over $40,000 a month. Simona Constantina, the speaker lineup's absolutely amazing. But here's what I think my event is different from others. This is not about the audience and then the speakers. This is about everybody coming together, learning from one another, connecting. It's not this red velvet rope where the speakers are over there and you can't get to them. We all hang out together. We have a good time. And I always say it's a day-long rock concert for entrepreneurs, forward thinkers, and people looking to level up in their life. And so I'm honored to have you there, man. And anybody who wants to come, they can go to growthnowsummit.com, grab their tickets, and I'd be excited to have them there too.
And if anyone else wants to find out more about you, where would you like them to go?
Yeah, wherever they're listening to this show, they can search Growth Now Movement or just type in Growth Now. It'll pop up. And I always say this, like, I'm on a journey just like everybody else. And so if they check out my show and they like it, click subscribe and come on the journey with me and learn from the amazing people that I get to learn from as well. And I'd be honored if they reach out. Actually, Instagram's my favorite platform. Yeah. So if they follow me there, it's at Justin T. Schenck is my handle there. And then, follow me there, send me a message. Would love to hear from people.
And I'll link all that in the show notes. Justin, thank you so much for doing this, man. I can't tell you again how much this means to me. And there's a book that I carry around with all my dream guests, and now it's so gratifying everyone's name is written in there, and I check it off at the end, and I love it. So thanks again.
Martin, man, I appreciate you. And dude, if I can help you check some names off your list, let me know. I'll make some introductions.
I'll screenshot it and I'll send it to you. Yeah, I would love that.
Dude, this was a blast, man. I appreciate you having me on. Let me know when it comes out. I'll promote the shit out of it. I'll do all the stuff.
Thank you.
And then I'm trying to think. Yeah, dude, and send me that screenshot because if I can make some introductions, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, for sure, man. Dude, thank you so much. And I look forward to meeting you in person in September.
Yeah, dude, it'll be here before we know it. That's for sure.